The night hung heavy over the city, thick with rain and silence. From her small, dimly lit apartment, Mara could hear the steady rhythm of drops striking the windows, a sound that once comforted her, but now only echoed her loneliness. The single candle on her nightstand flickered weakly, casting trembling shadows that danced across the walls. She sat on the edge of her unmade bed, clutching an unopened letter from the hospital. For 3 long days, it had sat on her dresser, a symbol of everything she feared. Her mother had been fighting a rare illness for months, and though Mara prayed every night for a miracle, she already knew in her heart what the envelope contained. Her hands trembled as she brushed her thumb over the paper. "Please, God, not this too," she whispered. Her voice cracked. It felt strange to say his name out loud. She hadn't done that in weeks. There was a time when she'd felt his nearness in everything, in the sunrise, in the laughter of children, in her mother's gentle smile. But lately, the world felt hollow. Her prayers bounced back from the ceiling, unanswered. The bakery where she worked had closed suddenly, leaving her without income. The rent was overdue. The electricity company had already sent a warning notice. And now, her mother. Mara stared at the candle, its tiny flame struggling to survive against the draft slipping through the window cracks. "Where are you?" she said softly, barely more than a breath. "You promised you'd never leave me. But you have, haven't you?" The room didn't answer. The clock on the wall ticked louder with every passing second. She could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on her chest. With a deep, shaky breath, she tore the envelope open. Her eyes scanned the printed words. "No further treatment options available, condition irreversible, we recommend hospice care." The words blurred as her tears fell onto the page. She dropped the letter onto the floor and buried her face in her hands. It wasn't fair. She had spent her life trying to do what was right, helping her neighbors, caring for her sick mother, trusting that God would carry her through. But now, she felt like she was standing in an endless night, and he had turned away. Her sobs grew louder until her voice broke. "I can't do this anymore," she cried out. "You said you were my refuge, my strength, so where are you now?" The only response was the wind howling outside. Mara slid off the bed, sinking to her knees on the cold wooden floor. The candle's flame quivered as if it, too, was struggling to hold on. She pressed her forehead against her folded hands, but the words wouldn't come. Prayer had always been her lifeline, but now even that felt hollow. "I've lost everything," she whispered through tears. "If you're really there, if you're still listening, then find me. Please, just find me." She stayed there for a long time, her body shaking from exhaustion until sleep finally overtook her. When she opened her eyes again, she wasn't in her room. She stood barefoot in a field that stretched endlessly beneath a golden sky. The air was warm and smelled of wildflowers and rain. Every blade of grass shimmered like it was made of light. Mara looked around in awe. "Where am I?" she whispered. Then she heard it, a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Deep, gentle, and full of peace. "Mara." She froze. Her heart began to pound. "Who's there?" The light in front of her grew brighter, taking the form of a figure. It wasn't harsh or blinding, just radiant, warm, and full of love so overwhelming it brought tears to her eyes. "Do not be afraid," the voice said. Her lips trembled. "Who are you?" she asked, though her soul already knew. "I am," the figure replied. The sound of those 2 words resonated through her entire being. Her knees gave way, and she fell to the soft grass, weeping. "Then why couldn't I feel you?" she asked. "I begged you to show me something, to tell me you hadn't left me." The figure stepped closer, and though he said nothing for a moment, Mara felt something shifting inside her, like the breaking of chains she hadn't realized she carried. "You thought I was gone because you could not see me," the voice said finally. "But my child, I never left. Even when the world turned cold, I stood beside you in the silence." Mara lifted her tear-streaked face. "Then why does it hurt so much? Why do I feel like I'm drowning in the dark?" The light moved closer still, and she could feel its warmth washing over her, melting the heaviness in her chest. "Pain calls your heart deeper into mine," he said softly. "In the moments you thought you were alone, I was there, holding you through the storm, waiting for you to listen. Not with your ears, but with your heart." The field seemed to glow even brighter. She could hear a river nearby, its waters glimmering with gold and silver reflections. Drawn by an unseen pull, she walked toward it. When she looked into its surface, she saw her reflection, but behind it, standing tall and unwavering, was the same figure of light. "You are not abandoned," the voice whispered. "You never were." Mara's tears fell into the river, creating ripples that shimmered with light. "But I've lost everything," she said quietly. "My mother, my job, my home, even myself. Everything you think you've lost," the voice said, "was never meant to define you. The world may fall away, but my love remains. My presence finds you, not because you seek me perfectly, but because I never stop seeking you." Mara fell to her knees again, trembling. She felt her heart break open, not from despair this time, but from something deeper, something pure. The weight that had suffocated her for months lifted, and in its place came a stillness she had forgotten existed. She reached out, dipping her fingers into the river. The moment her skin touched the water, warmth flooded through her entire body. She felt as if 1,000 suns had ignited inside her chest, not burning, but healing. Every wound, every scar, every moment of hopelessness seemed to dissolve in that light. Then the voice spoke again, quieter now, but close enough that it felt like a whisper in her ear. "Mara, my presence is not found in the absence of pain, it is found within it. When you walk through fire, I am the one who keeps you from being consumed. When you walk through the valley, I am the shadow beside you." The golden field began to fade. The sound of rain returned, faint at first, then stronger. She blinked, and suddenly she was back in her room, still kneeling on the floor beside her bed. The candle had burned low, but its flame remained steady, unwavering. Mara looked around, her breath shaky, her heart pounding. The room was the same, yet something within her was utterly transformed. She picked up the letter again. The words hadn't changed, but she had. This time, when she read them, she didn't feel despair. She felt peace, a strange, unexplainable peace that wrapped around her like an invisible embrace. Her tears fell again, but now they were gentle, tears of surrender, not defeat. "Thank you," she whispered into the quiet. And though there was no sound, no flash of light, she felt it deep within her spirit, the unmistakable, sacred answer. "My presence finds you here." The next morning, the world seemed different, though nothing in it had truly changed. The same gray clouds lingered over the city, the same tired streets stretched before her window. But Mara's heart beat with a quiet steadiness she hadn't felt in months. It was as if something invisible had shifted within her, like dawn breaking after a night that had lasted too long. She got dressed slowly, moving with purpose. Her reflection in the mirror looked the same. Tired eyes, worn clothes, hair pulled back carelessly, but her gaze held a spark again. The kind of light that comes not from circumstance, but from something eternal. She poured herself a cup of tea and stood by the window. The world outside was alive. Children walking to school in bright raincoats, an old man sweeping the sidewalk, birds darting between puddles. For the first time in a long while, she saw beauty in the ordinary. By midday, she was on her way to the hospital. The corridors smelled faintly of antiseptic and roses from the volunteer cart near the reception. Nurses passed her with polite smiles, the kind reserved for people who had become too familiar with the place. Her mother lay by the window, sunlight spilling across her thin frame. Her breathing was shallow, but peaceful. Mara sat beside her, taking her frail hand into her own. The warmth of that hand had always been her anchor. "Hi, Mama," she whispered, her voice soft but steady. "It's me." Her mother's eyes fluttered open, the corners of her lips turning into a faint smile. "You came early," she murmured, her voice fragile as silk. "I wanted to see you," Mara said. I had a dream last night." Her mother's brow lifted slightly. "A good one, I hope." Mara smiled faintly. "It was more than good. I saw him." Her mother's eyes glistened, though she said nothing. Mara continued, her words spilling like a river finally freed. "He told me he never left. That even when I couldn't feel him, he was still here. I thought I'd been abandoned, Mama, but I wasn't. He found me." A tear slipped down her mother's cheek. She squeezed Mara's hand weakly. "He always does, sweetheart. He always finds the ones who think they're lost." Mara rested her head gently against her mother's arm. I think I finally believe that again. For hours, they sat together. They didn't speak much. Sometimes, silence carries more love than words ever could. Mara hummed softly, the same lullaby her mother used to sing when she was little. Time slowed, stretching tenderly around them. As evening fell, her mother's breathing grew more labored. Mara noticed it immediately. A part of her wanted to panic, to beg God for one more day, one more hour. But another part of her, deeper, wiser, at peace, knew this moment was sacred. She leaned close, brushing her mother's hair away from her face. "It's okay, Mama," she whispered through her tears. "You can rest now. I'll be okay." Her mother's eyes met hers one last time. "He'll take care of you," she whispered. And with that, her breath faded, gentle as a sigh. The monitor went still. Mara sat there in the stillness, her heart breaking open, but instead of despair, she felt a wave of warmth surround her. It was as though invisible arms wrapped around her shoulders. The same presence she'd felt in her dream filled the room, soft and radiant. Tears streamed down her face, but they weren't tears of emptiness. They were tears of knowing her mother was finally home. Knowing that God had been there all along, in every breath, in every heartbeat, even in this goodbye. When she finally stood to leave, the nurse gently touched her arm. She was peaceful, the nurse said quietly. It was like she was waiting for something, or someone. Mara smiled faintly, her voice steady. She was waiting for him. The days that followed were quiet and heavy. Grief visited often, like an old friend sitting beside her in silence. Some mornings, the ache was so strong she could barely rise from bed. But every time the darkness crept close, she remembered the voice that said, "My presence finds you here." One evening, she sat on her mother's favorite armchair, surrounded by photo albums. The soft hum of the rain outside filled the silence. She opened a page and smiled through her tears. A picture of her and her mother baking bread together, flour smudged on their noses, laughter frozen in time. "I'll keep living," she whispered. "Not because it's easy, but because you've called me to." As weeks passed, Mara began to volunteer at the hospital where her mother had spent her final days. At first, it was difficult, the smell of antiseptic, the sight of white walls, but gradually, it became healing. One afternoon, she noticed a young woman sitting alone in the waiting area, tears streaking down her face. Something in Mara's heart stirred. She recognized that look, that raw grief. Mara approached her quietly. "Are you okay?" The woman shook her head, clutching a crumpled tissue. "My dad. They say he won't make it through the night." Her voice broke. "I don't know how to do this. I can't lose him." Mara hesitated for a moment, then sat beside her. "I know," she said softly. "I lost my mom not long ago. I thought I'd never survive it." The woman looked at her through her tears. "How did you?" Mara smiled faintly. "I didn't, not by myself. But I found out. Or maybe, he found me. When I thought everything was lost, God was closer than I ever imagined. He never left me, and he won't leave you either." The woman began to cry again, but this time, there was something gentler in her sobs, something like release. Mara took her hand and held it, saying nothing more. When Mara walked home that night, the city lights shimmered on the wet pavement, reflecting like stars scattered at her feet. She tilted her head upward, watching the dark clouds drift apart to reveal a sliver of moonlight. "Thank you," she whispered, "for finding me, and for letting me find others." The wind stirred, brushing through her hair, and in its gentle whisper she heard it again, faint but unmistakable. "My presence is not bound by walls or distance. I am in the breaking and in the mending. When you speak kindness, I speak through you. When you comfort others, I move within you." Mara closed her eyes, tears of gratitude spilling over. She realized now that the presence she once begged to feel had never vanished. It had simply grown quiet, waiting for her to see that it was everywhere. Months later, on the anniversary of her mother's passing, Mara returned to the golden field in her dreams. Only this time, she wasn't asleep. She stood in a meadow outside the city, a place she'd never been before but had somehow always known. The wind carried the scent of flowers, the same as in that vision months ago. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply. "Thank you for keeping your promise," she said softly. "You found me in my lowest place. You turned my night into dawn." The breeze brushed against her cheek like a touch. And then, clearer than before, she heard the words that had changed her life once more. My presence finds you here. In your joy and in your sorrow. In your healing and your pain. Wherever your journey leads, I go before you. Mara opened her eyes. The sky was painted with the gold of a setting sun. The world felt sacred, alive, glowing, full of quiet grace. And as she walked back down the hill, her steps steady, her heart light, she knew one truth that would never leave her again. She was never alone. She never had been. Because even in silence, even in shadows, God's presence always finds us here.